And we begin this hour with breaking news out of Lower Manhattan. Luigi Mangione, the man who's accused of killing UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson earlier this month, is back in New York City, arriving in Manhattan just after 1 this afternoon. He arrived here on an NYPD helicopter. He was flown to New York immediately after a court appearance in Pennsylvania this morning. He was arrested in Pennsylvania in a McDonald's there earlier this month. It was December 9th. That he was arrested, and at the court appearance in Pennsylvania, the 26-year-old then formally agreed to be extradited back to the city. He is now facing 4 federal charges. Among the other charges he's facing, those federal charges include 2 counts of stalking, 1 count of murder through the use of a firearm, and 1 firearms offense. Mangione appeared before a U.S. magistrate judge in Lower Manhattan, as I said, just a short time ago. Chris Welch was there inside that courtroom, and he joins me now from outside that courthouse with the very latest. Chris, it was a pretty quick hearing.
It was a pretty quick hearing, all in all about 15 minutes, Annika, and I want to begin by sort of painting the picture of how this all began. We're on the 26th floor here at the federal courthouse. It's shortly before 3 p.m. We see 2 U.S. Marshals enter the courtroom. They do a little sweep of his desk, the desk area where Luigi Mangione was going to be sitting. They checked the chair, they checked under his chair, and then they brought in suspect Luigi Mangione. He was dressed in a dark navy quarter zip sweater over a white button-down shirt. And this is important to note, he was not wearing handcuffs. So as he sat down, he sat between his 2 lawyers. We kind of saw him scratch his head at one point, kind of even try to fix his hair at one point before the hearing began. But once it did begin, we heard Judge Catherine Parker summarizing those new federal charges that you laid out, Annika. That includes murder through use of a firearms charge, and 2 stalking charges. And that federal murder charge is eligible for the death penalty. Now, Judge Parker asked Mangione if he understood his rights. He simply answered with 1 word. He said yes. He was asked if he understood the charges, and he again answered yes. Now, U.S. attorneys argued that he should remain behind bars, and Mangione's defense team did not seek bail. So they say they do, though, reserve right to do so at a later date. So he will remain behind bars. Now, keep in mind here, Mangione is facing 3 separate sets of charges. He's got the lesser charges in Pennsylvania, the New York charges, which include first-degree murder and furtherance of an act of terrorism, and now these federal charges. And all day long, Annika, I got to tell you, ever since we found out that he would now be facing federal charges, there was a lot of confusion about what this could mean for that state case. But in this hearing today, U.S. attorneys and representatives from the U.S. Attorney's Office said that the Manhattan DA's case is still proceeding. Now, it was at that moment that Mangione's lead defense attorney, former prosecutor in the DA's office, Karen Agnifilo, she stood up to ask for clarity here. She called this a, quote, highly unusual situation. She said just yesterday, DA Alvin Bragg held a press conference announcing the terror-related murder charges, and they were told to prepare for a 2 p.m. hearing today regarding that. She says these new federal charges appear to be in conflict with the state charges. She says terror charges in one versus stalking an individual on another. She said that in 3 decades as a prosecutor, she's never seen anything like this. Now, the judge responded to her criticism there and her confusion by asking the defense and the prosecution to meet separately after the hearing was over, which they appeared to agree to do so. And the next court date for Luigi Mangione is set to be right here, January 18th, Annika. So a lot going on here in Lower Manhattan.
A couple of things, Chris, because as you point out, a lot going on. And then you have these parallel charges, both the state and the federal one. That court date that you bring up on January 18th, I'm assuming that's the federal court date for that appearance. And then I also want you to touch on what was found in his backpack, because allegedly, according to the federal prosecutors at least, we learned quite a bit more about how he had prepared, allegedly prepared for this incident.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the next court appearance. It's a preliminary hearing in the federal case, but regarding the state case, I even asked, we all asked the attorneys after this hearing today, are you hearing more of when he could make his first appearance for those state charges? They say, we have no idea. At some point earlier today, we were wondering if there might be 2 appearances in 2 separate courtrooms. It doesn't appear that that's going to be the case today, but of course, you never really know. But you talked about the notebook. We did learn a little bit more about the writings that police found in the backpack that he had on him when he was arrested in Altoona, Pennsylvania. He had a notebook in there, and then he also had a letter that was addressed, quote, to the feds. And I want to read you a couple excerpts. First, from the notebook entry, he wrote this on August 15th. Quote, the details are finally coming together. And quote, I'm glad in a way that I've procrastinated because this has allowed me to learn more about, and then he put the acronym of a healthcare insurance company. He also wrote, quote, the target is insurance because, quote, it checks every box. Then on October 22nd, he wrote, he described his intent to, quote, whack the CEO of one of the insurance companies at its investor conference. And then in that note, I mentioned that he addressed to the feds. He wrote, I wasn't working with anyone else. This is all self-funded, my own ATM withdrawals. And I imagine we will continue to learn more as discovery and evidence is introduced in these proceedings. Annika.
A lot of information there, Chris Welch. We really appreciate it. And of course, as we mentioned, Mangione started his day at that hearing in Altoona, Pennsylvania. That is where he waived his right to be extradited to New York. The Blair County District Attorney there also says that he will not face the firearm and forgery charges that he was brought in on. Now, as we just heard from Chris, he is facing both of those federal and state of New York charges that are tied to the death of CEO Brian Thompson. Victoria Manna was at the courthouse in Altoona. She joins me now from there with the very latest. Victoria.
Well, Annika, that's right. Mangione walked into the courtroom here today in handcuffs. He appeared expressionless, kind of looking ahead as he sat down in his seat. But once he sat down, he was seemingly more relaxed, kind of leaning back in his seat there. He was seen, looking around the courtroom from time to time. But at one point, he was seen laughing and smiling with his attorney. Now, there were two hearings here today at the Blair County Courthouse. After the first hearing, his attorney wanted to speak to the judge. So he spoke to the judge for about 20 to 30 minutes before that second extradition hearing, kind of leaving Luigi Mangione there at the desk. And throughout that time, he just remained there, kind of looking forward. He was looking around the papers there, but leaning back again, seemingly more relaxed today, Annika.
And Victoria, talk a little bit about how he appeared when he was taken away from that courthouse. It was a little bit different than we had seen from him in the past. We had seen the reports of all the protesters outside who were really there protesting the legal system, not what he is alleged to have done. But just talk to us a little bit about his appearance when you saw him.
Yeah, so again, he seemed a little more relaxed today. The last time that he was seen here at this courthouse, he said something before walking into the courthouse, but today he didn't say anything walking in or out of the courthouse. But you mentioned those protesters. There were about a dozen of them here outside of the courthouse today. Some people were even present in the courtroom, these protesters, people in support of Luigi Mangione, people criticizing the healthcare industry. Now, these protests even got the attention of Mayor Eric Adams today, and here's what he had to say.
The beauty of this country is that you have the right to protest the right. And those who are protesting when someone uses violence to solve the problem, and anyone that celebrates that, it is vile and it is sending the wrong message, and you're celebrating using violence to solve an issue.
Yeah, Annika, so definitely some protesters out here today, but definitely not as many protesters as there were media here today. There were lines to get into this courtroom wrapped around the block here. You have to think, this is not just our local news outlets in New York, but also national news outlets. And again, you have local Pennsylvania news outlets here today as well, Annika.
And presumably they now all move to New York, where he is facing both those federal and state charges. Victoria Manna in Pennsylvania for us. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.